this game that we're going to talk about first, extremely gross, but pieces of it at least are very interesting from a DFS and fantasy football perspective, I would think. Game number one, it's Bears at Lions. Chicago is a 3-point road favorite per FanDuel Sportsbook with Andy Dalton at quarterback. Not a ton of sharp action on either side so far. The total is far and away the lowest on the slate at just 42 points. But Reeves, how are you attacking this one?
Yeah, this is interesting because it's always the first game too. So, you think about like these games, how they roll out during the day. I mean, do you want to save your exposure for the middle, the late games?
Yep.
Are people just going to play players in this game because it is the first game and that's when they're going to be sitting around? There's a lot of different dynamics that go into the slate that we kind of overanalyze, but that exist. It's a lot of minutia to get through. And when you have David Blau like throw a 70-yard touchdown to Kenny Galladay to like kick off of a Thanksgiving game, there's like things happen on this slate. It's one of the funnest slates. Or Jesper Horsted catches a touchdown. Remember that? Or
right.
Like
God, so brutal.
Some randoms, but this game in particular, from an objective stance, is not attractive on any level, really. You have the 32nd and 31st ranked teams in EPA per passing offenses going against each other. Detroit has been just an absolute, sieve all year. On their passing defense, and their passing offense has been so bad. They're averaging 2.1 fewer yards per pass attempt than their opponents. It's by far the worst in the NFL by over a full yard. But then we're getting Andy Dalton this game. We're not even getting Justin Fields either. Like the fun, like could be fun. Like we may have a Konami quarterback on the slate. He played pretty well against Detroit. Was starting to play well before he got the rib injury. Now we have Andy Dalton, here. So we got Andy Dalton against this terrible, Detroit defense. But it was nice to actually see Andy Dalton complete a deep pass when he came in relief last week.
The fact that we have to even preface that is so absurd. Yeah, it was nice that he completed a deep pass. Like that is like the most rounding endorsement I've heard about Andy Dalton all week, man. He might actually be relatively popular because of the other quarterbacks on the slate are so much more expensive. So yeah, there you go. Rounding endorsement.
Remember?
That's
like Blau a couple years ago. I mean,
pregame slate might not matter.
He's definitely one of the top 6 quarterbacks on the slate. We do know that.
Yeah.
I mean, even in the other side, you look at Goff and he's coming off the oblique injury. So Goff hasn't, he hasn't finished a week higher than QB 23, since week 2. But the last time that, he did play the Bears, he threw for 299 yards and he was 24 of 38 passing. He had 17 fantasy points, which was his second highest scoring game over his past 6 games played. So even he has a little bit of shred of dignity on this slate in particular, right? Like if Goff comes out at his price and he throws for 2 touchdowns and 299 yards, like that's relevant. Like this is what this is the Thanksgiving life. Like
oblique injury for Jared Goff. Like he's like the guy that I want in like peak performance at the Stone Min to even like consider it. But he is a game time decision at this point, right? Like do we know for sure he's in? I might have missed that.
No, it looks like he's trending positively.
Okay.
By all accounts, obviously you have to follow this thing to the 11th hour and wait for inactives to come out, but he is trending positively to play. We would like him to play. If anyone watched Tim Boyle play, who entered last week's game with more kneel downs than career pass attempts, his pass attempts should have just been kneel downs last week against the Browns. I mean, What a travesty. 77 passing yards in like this modern era of NFL. It was rough.
It's almost like really tough to do at that point, right?
Yeah. Especially like I said, in this era of the NFL. But, when we remove ourselves from the quarterbacks of this game, and who knows, like I said, they could hit, you never know because Detroit's pass defense has been so bad. And like I said, Goff was actually functional against the Bears and they played earlier in the season outdoors. But the running backs in this game are kind of appealing. I think we will definitely see David Montgomery be arguably the most popular player on this slate, other than some cheapies that are favorites. But in terms of the higher price guys, I think David Montgomery is going to carry a lot of ownership against this Detroit team that has now allowed 63% of the touchdowns scored against them to come from running backs. It's the highest rate in the NFL. He had 106 yards and 2 touchdowns against the Lions when they played earlier in the season, had to leave the game early. That was when he suffered his injury that forced him to miss all that time earlier in the season. So I do think that he will be relatively popular. He played 95% of the snaps last week. And since he's returned, he's had 30 of the 35 Bears backfield touches. So as much as Khalil Herbert was exciting, he's been completely shelved with Monty coming back. And on the other side, DeAndre Swift, for up until, for 8 weeks of the season, we were like literally playing DeAndre Swift for like as a pass catcher and hoping he sucked out some catches at the end of the games. And the last 2 weeks it's flipped. He's been he set a new career high in rushing each game, in rushing yardage the past 2 weeks. Now he did get there on a 57-yard, touchdown kind of, scamper last week to get over, but 130 yards rushing 2 weeks ago, 136 last week. He's starting to get, kind of the bulk of carries, and he's not catching the football. So, so I mean, he's a guy that's kind of by hook or crook has gotten there for fantasy over the course of the season. The Bears have struggled to defend running backs. They've allowed 4.5 yards per carry. That's 23rd amongst backs. They've allowed 14.7 rushing points per game. That's 24th in the NFL. So I mean, DeAndre Swift's going to be popular too. That's where it's going to be. The backs will be popular. And then, Allen Robinson trending towards doubtful.
Reeves, let me stop you for 1 second before we get to Mooney, because we did run the Sims here. 3-game slate. I actually think this is pretty valuable to simulate this slate 10,000 times. Obviously, runthesims.com/Holka, get you your 10% off. But the two optimal players, I guess the two highest optimal rate players are David Montgomery and DeAndre Swift. So over 50% for both of them in the optimal lineup if we were to simulate this 10,000 times. So yeah, I hate the fact that they're in the first game, but like for all the reasons that you just said, both of them very attractive for sure.
Yeah, and it's tough because, they are relatively expensive in context of the slate. And, we want to keep that flex open as long as possible on this slate. So you need at both your running back spots, then you end up having to pivot to Zeke in the second game. At least in the late game, the running backs, when we get there eventually, and if you are pretty gross. Maybe Mark Ingram is kind of attractive, but like the Bills have kind of like weeded out like everybody from the wanting to play everybody because it's now a 3-man backfield.
Right.
But watch one of those guys score. Like, we live that life. So
I cut you off on Mooney though, and I think he's going to be one that people want to talk about from this game as well, right? Like with Allen Robinson out, like the price point, like outside of Stephon Diggs, there's not like really a high-end wide receiver to pay for, right?
Yeah, they did. Now, Allen Robinson did meet with the media yesterday, which typically don't let injured players do. So definitely keep an eye on if he does like sneakily become active.
Yeah.
Through this remaining time where we're recording this ahead of schedule here. But, last week with Mooney out or with Robinson out, Mooney had 16 targets. He had 49% of the team targets. Now he only caught 5 of them, but, he made the most of them. He had a 60-yard, catch and run on a screen pass for his 3rd receiving touchdown of the year. We've talked about this Lions defense. We kind of teased it a little bit. The defense is the Lions defense is only facing 17.8 targets per game to opposing wide receivers. But they're allowing 9.2 yards per target. That's 29th. Allowing 14.2 yards per catch. That's 28th. Mooney himself had 125 yards already on them early in the season. So people always love that, right? When a guy plays another team and he was good against them earlier in the season, people love that stuff, even though it's, it's not really sticky. But the matchup is great.
The BVP, like the baseball stuff.
The BVP.
Oh, God.
The T.Y. Hilton versus the Texans.
God.
But, from a matchup stance and the target volume stance, should Allen Robinson miss all lines, right? Like if he's going to get, that high of a share of the team targets against the team that's objectively been bad guarding players the entire season, people are going to be interested.
Sure.
Even on the other side, I mean, there's maybe like some moderate intrigue. I don't know if we'll see any ownership from the Detroit wide receivers. Josh Reynolds, who they just picked up, actually led the team in routes run with 96% route participation against the Browns. Not really, didn't turn into any production, but he was out there getting that cardio. And if he's going to be out there on a Thanksgiving slate for that much, I mean, definitely some intrigue. We saw Khalif Raymond had 2 touchdowns against the Bears when they played earlier in the season. Marquise Goodwin, we talked about Allen Robinson. He ran a route on 76% of the Bears dropbacks, and he's a kind of a big play guy, right? Like if he's a guy that can catch a 40-yard touchdown, that's your salary right there, right?
Yeah. And honestly, this is like the type of slate too that if you can get lucky on like a lower owned kind of cheaper play in game number 1, it really sets your lineup up for the rest of the slate. Now, if you've watched any of my other videos throughout this entire week, it's like, we have to tack this in order, right? So we're adjusting our lineups on the fly. You have time to make your late swaps in between, and really just like trying to find some under the radar plays from game number 1 is always something that I'm kind of interested in. So yeah, Josh Reynolds, 4,900 on FanDuel, Khalif Raymond, 5,100, Marquise Goodwin, 5,400. It's like all these guys are super cheap. It's going to be very difficult to pinpoint who it's going to be, but they're also going to be like 5% owned or less in some cases, depending on your contest. So yeah, it's definitely an opportunity. It's just kind of a scary thing to click in the first game for sure.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, like I said, and you look at Marquise Goodwin, where he the types of targets he gets and the upside he could have. He could get there, like he could have 3 targets in the game and hit.
Yeah.
And he's leverage off of Mooney, and has the same matchup advantages, and then obviously Monty too. So it is very interesting to see if you want to come in with him. The tight ends might be kind of popular too. I don't know like how much they're popping in the Sims, but when you're looking at like kind of projected ownership, I do think there'll be some popularity here. TJ Hawkinson is one of these guys that, like, I don't know, people really don't like to play him, do they?
I think
guess
both these
maybe
guys could go under-owned a little bit. They're not popping in the Sims by any means, but I think it's really just like Darren Waller, and then people are going to want to play these Dallas guys, especially with no Amari and potentially no CD Lamb. I think Dalton Schultz could grab some ownership too. So I actually think that like the tight ends are some of the guys I was considering at somewhat lower ownership. I bet Hawkinson's like 20%. It's a 3-game slate, but it's not as bad as like Waller, who could potentially get up to like 50 in some contests.
I mean, especially Hawkinson. I know that like he, makes. I live in my redraft world sometimes, and I hear all the commentary on Hawkinson. How he really hasn't lived up to the draft capital, but like still from like a target share perspective, he's getting jammed with opportunities. I mean, he still, he had 8 targets again last week, and it was 35% of the team targets. He has 28% of the team targets or more in 4 of his past 5 games played. He's 8 or more actual counting targets in 4 of those 5 games too. He's just a low ADOT kind of player because of what the construct of Jared Goff and this offense is, and obviously Tim Boyle last week. So he's not getting a lot of yardage. He hasn't scored a touchdown since week 2 either, but he's getting a lot of opportunity. I would say from a target share perspective, he has to project for one of the largest of the 6 tight ends. Or double extra tight ends if you're counting any of the double Saints guys in this game on the slate. But yeah, I mean, he from a target share perspective, like that amount of targets, like we typically don't ignore, and people do want to ignore him because the production really hasn't been there with him. But the target share has been like relatively steady and high, especially at his position, kind of throughout the entire season.
Yeah. Another thing that people like, Reeves, they like the lineup builds. So we are going to build a stack at the very least. And like if you did want to attack this game, how we would kind of approach it. Obviously, like we said, there's going to be a lot of late swap. There's a lot of things that kind of have to fall into place here. But I want to just do like a quick 2-minute build here, Reeves, of how we would attack this if we wanted to go the Andy Dalton side of this game. I guess, are we pairing him with Mooney and one of these like lower owned, cheaper guys on the Detroit side? Or how would you like to approach this? We could add the running backs to this stack. Let's try and build like some sort of a game stack heavy build for the Chicago-Detroit game. See how it looks.
Yeah, I mean, so if you want to go with Dalton, I think the obvious thing is we just outright fade Mooney, right? Montgomery.
Montgomery, yep.
We outright fade Montgomery. We got our little kind of one-off stack, and we would take our chances, right, on being ahead of the field, like already at 1. Like that's where we would take our chances, because we're assuming this is we're going to assume this is like large field MME stuff.
Yeah. So I'm thinking that we should pick at least one piece of the Detroit side, and maybe even add Marquise Goodwin to this too, because I think if this completely hits and we're playing like that fade of Montgomery, we're going to want like what scenario is Andy Dalton the optimal like quarterback on this slate, right? He's got to throw for multiple touchdowns. So I would think that Mooney plus, and then the Montgomery fade, and then at least one piece on the Detroit side. So do we want to add Goodwin to this, you think, on the Chicago side, and then just pick one of these dart throw Detroit guys? What do you think?
I mean, we could, because if you're talking about like max centering like tournaments this week, I mean, people will out of their 150 play every quarterback.
Yep.
So there will be Mooney and Dalton stacks regardless, just inherently. So you would need an edge on those if hit too. So yeah, I mean, we can play Goodwin. Like I said, you just have to follow the news on Allen Robinson. So we would, obviously keep that in mind. But he's a guy that can get there, and like I said, he could maybe have a 4 target game and still get there.
So I think my next question is, would we want to like take the chance on Hawkinson and fade DeAndre Swift? Or do we want to try and just go like, again, like one of the things that I like about kind of getting contrarian early is if you do it with a really cheap player, it doesn't really bury your lineup the rest of the way if the slate kind of goes sideways anyway. So I actually like the idea of just like taking a shot on one of these like super thin Detroit guys, but I'm fine with whatever you're thinking.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is if we take a shot on like a Detroit wideout, we're tying up all 3 wide receivers.
That's true.
On this first game.
Maybe Hawk then, because then like we're leveraging all the Waller people. We're, I guess, in theory, leveraging all of the people playing running backs in this game too. So Let's do that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
Because even Swift will be popular on run.
Yep.
Swift will be the most popular run back with Mooney and Dalton for sure.
For sure. All right. So if we wanted to build out the rest of this team playing with this type of core, it's so contrarian that I think we can probably still go ahead and put Stefon Diggs into this team. So let's just see where that leads us. If I add the rest of these back to the slate. And then defense at this point, like this is my overall kind of strategy at defense is I still just want to try and play one of the later ones. I understand that you could go a different direction than that. So I would say either maybe the Raiders or we just leave it open at this point with either just throw in the Buffalo. And then if you get in trouble, maybe you just play New Orleans on that one. So I put in Buffalo for now. We still have 7,200 the rest of the way. So what are some of the other running backs that you have some interest in outside of the Chicago-Detroit game this week?
I mean, obviously Zeke is always appealing, especially with his touchdown equity. He has 11, touches inside the 10, and Pollard has 1.
We can afford it.
And Pollard's going to be a guy I think people definitely get cute with on this slate for sure. Because everyone loves Tony Pollard too.
Let's go Zeke for now, and then that leaves us with a running back and a flex, 6,600 the rest of the way. So let's try and figure out if we want to just add a Raiders player to this, and we'll do a little mini with Ezekiel Elliott, or maybe we want to try and grab again one of those lower owned wide receivers on the New Orleans side of things. I don't hate either with a Diggs mini. Any thoughts?
Yeah, it is definitely tough when you get into the weeds because like the Raiders only have 2 players they throw the football to.
Correct. So this isn't a Waller team. Maybe this is a Renfro team then. I think.
They really only throw to Waller and Renfro, and we're going to break down that game as well to give you some more insight on kind of the matchups. But yeah, I mean, it could be one of those situations. We could also, if we do play a Raiders guy, I would say, it would probably have to be Renfro, and he would tie up the flex.
Yeah, but that's not the end of the world. We could always just throw Jacobs in that for now. Again, this is the exact type of team that you're going to have to look at after the first game anyway and see where you're at.
Yeah.
So I think just leaving kind of a little bit of a mini stack there with game number 2 is totally fine. And then we still have some Stefon Diggs exposure and a defense. So I think that this construction works for sure.
Yeah, and you could always too, just play Jacobs as the run back, and then you've got a whole bunch of salary to move around. You could end up swapping Renfro to Mark Ingram later. If he's good to go, you'd have the option to go crazy. You could do Michael Gallup.
Maybe if things go really well with this Dalton stack, you just toss Gallup in there and you eat some chalk there. I think that's totally fine.
Right. So you'd have options because, like you said, you don't build this team and not check it. This is a 1 o'clock. Like I'm checking all my Dalton teams, all the Marquise Goodwin teams, and like you said, Goodwin's I think a perfect guy. Assuming our Robinson's out, is the perfect guy like at the 1 p.m. to take a shot at because he's cheap. If he doesn't miss, you're not buried, and if he hits, then you've got all kinds of funhouse money.
All right, happy Thanksgiving, everyone. Short on time this week, so I want everyone to know that there are a bunch more videos for the 3-game slate on this playlist right here, and we'll see you guys on Sunday.